Hey, sit right here. Okay. Look what I got for my birthday. I got a Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper, and it's not just a Trapper Keeper. Look. It's got big bright colors to the whole thing, and a pin and crayons. Best of all, a sticker pad. Look at all these awesome stickers, and they're like neon colors. I'm gonna put stickers on all my notebooks and all my homework and all my friends. Just stickers everywhere. Look, here is a pony with a rainbow tail. Where'd you go? Stick it on my shirt. Not on your shirt. Stick it on your face, man. They're cool. They're cool. Stickers everywhere. Awesome. Hey, what'd you bring for lunch? Let me check.
A bologna sandwich, as usual, and celery.
Yeah. I have a little bit.
You want to trade?
For your celery? Gag me with a spoon. Oh. You have the brand new Cool Ranch Doritos. I haven't tried them yet. Are they good?
So good.
They're good. They're like blue. I mean, that is so cool. Yeah, I'll totally trade for that.
So is your class watching the Challenger today?
Well, no, duh. Everybody's watching the Challenger. It's the first time a teacher's ever gone up in space. My teacher, she brought her big TV from home, put it on a cart, and plugged it in so we can watch it live as a whole class. And she said the schools, I mean, your class is watching, right?
Oh, yeah.
She said the schools all over the country, probably every kid in America is watching this today. It's so totally awesome. Oh, my goodness. Look at Jimmy over there on the playground. He just, like, jumped off the swing and his jacket caught on the swing and he totally face planted. Is that his tooth? I think that's his tooth. Come on, let's go see.
Oh, don't gag me with a maggot. Come on, Debbie.
Okay, the 80s. Turn you around so you can see the pictures. The decade of big and color. Sure, go ahead. Big and colorful. If you're writing notes, which today, if there's ever a day you don't need to write notes, it's today. Just enjoy it. You are allowed to teach your little Debbie in class if you wish. Oh. The 80s was a decade of as bright and as obnoxious as you could get. Now, I'm going to tell you that what I'm going to tell you about the 80s today is from the perspective of a kid. The 80s was my decade. I was 5 to 15 through the 80s. When you talk to someone in person about their memories about history, in a way, you get more history because it's from a personal perspective. But in a way, you get less history because it's from only one personal perspective. So there were a lot of things going on in the 80s that I probably didn't notice because I was 10 years old. But we're going to talk about my 80s and maybe a little of the other stuff just because it's history class. But that is one of the reasons it's really fun to talk to people about their memories because you get a look at history in a different way than just reading a history book. Which is why, if you flip your worksheet over, you will notice that your homework this week, if you choose to accept it, and a way to get a lot of extra points, is to interview someone. Now, you can choose which decade, as long as they're old enough and they remember it, and you get a different level of points depending on how the decade goes. So if you know someone like me, as in, your parents, and you interview them about the 80s, and you bring me a page of the answers to their questions, you get a certain number of points. If you can interview someone about the 70s, grandparents, the 60s, probably grandparents, the 50s, if you have a great-grandparent, if you know somebody who's quite old, if you can get somebody from the 40s, that's like a ton of points. And if you think there's nobody left who remembers the 40s, we have people at Source of Light who do, so if you need somebody to interview, you can come hang out with us. You need to find somebody who's in their 80s or 90s. And that's like tons of points. And it's a good experience because when you're talking to them, you're giving them permission to go back in time when things were fun, simpler. I have been looking forward to the 80s for weeks and weeks and weeks because I want to introduce you to my childhood because it's weird and it's fun. Giving other people the opportunity to do that is nice, especially when they're really old and sometimes they just feel old. It gives them a chance to feel young again. So this is an opportunity to actually bless somebody and get lots of points. Win-win. All right, the 80s was a time of big hair, lots of sugar, and Saturday morning cartoons. If you're writing notes, I want you to write down 2 things that I want you to ask your parents about, whether you're doing an interview or not. Next week, plan on me asking you about these 2 things. 1, Saturday morning cartoons. Didn't have time to talk about that. 2, Baby Jessica. I'm not going to tell you what that's about. You have to find out for yourself. All right, this is a decade of big patriotism and big hair. Yeah, no kidding. This may seem extreme. Again, if I brought you my yearbook from school, it isn't. Just so you know. We had so much hairspray in our hair, it's a wonder that any was left. And just so you know, when you were doing the hairspray thing, I had this girl in class when I was in 8th grade. She had the wings. Now, most of us had the poof in the front, very, very important. But she had the wings, and what she had to do every single morning of her life, she had a spiral perm. Everybody had a spiral perm. She would hold out her hair like this far, and she would spray it with hairspray. And then she would wave it until it finally dried, and stay like this till it dried. And then she would stand up, and her hair would go oink and down. And then she would do it the other side, and wave it, oink, and so her hair went eek, and then down in the spiral perm, and she had the poof. She was cool. Every day, y'all, because when you go home and when you brush this out, all the hairspray turned into little white, little maggoty looking things all over your hair, and so then you had to wash it and start all over again. Fun times. The things we do for beauty. Wrong here. Okay, this is the age of also the mullet. Wasn't cool then, isn't cool now. Why are we bringing this back? I don't know. All right, the population in the beginning of the 80s was 226 million people, so we're getting to be a bigger, bigger country. Lots of energy, lots of hopes and goals and that sort of thing. The average wage was $12,500 for the year, which doesn't seem like a lot. This was the decade of rainbows, and rainbows in a good way. Rainbows didn't mean what they do right now. So all the kids, this was like the cool thing to do. Can you go turn on that light? If you had clothes on that had rainbows, you were cool. If you had clothes on that had a unicorn, you were cool. Thank you. If you had clothes that had rainbow and a unicorn, that was awesome. And if your unicorn could fly, it had wings. Wow. So rainbows all the time. Rainbows on your socks. Rainbows on your skirts. Rainbows on your headband. Rainbows on your notebooks. We were very, very colorful. Like I said. Now this is tough because on the video, if we keep the light on, you can actually see me. And if we turn the light off, you can actually see the pictures. Pictures are more important. So I'll just be a ghost. Can you go turn the light off again? This is Rainbow Bright. And if you were a Rainbow Bright girl, you could have a whole room of rainbows. Yay. It's no wonder we did aerobics. We were all just kind of like, ooh. All right. And I mentioned the hair. This is more hair. So again, spiral perms. So that's where that little kinky thing happens. Big poof up the front. Out the sides, out every direction you could possibly imagine. The more the better. And I'm serious. So maybe we weren't this extreme, but this was the thing. This took 2 perms in my hair because it was really, really straight. But yeah, the front and the side, whatever. I don't know what I was thinking. My sister is a perfect example. She was in high school and she was doing it right. So blue eyeshadow. My grandpa used to call her siren eyes because when she flapped her eyes, it looked like sirens on a police car. She didn't think that was very funny, but I thought it was really funny. She's got the poof, she's got the bangs, and they're like stuck, y'all. It's hairsprayed so much that if the wind blows, your whole hair goes it's not going anywhere. Got the curls out the side. Notice the big plastic earrings, the big plastic necklace. That was good for like dressy. Do I need to say anything? Hammer pants were really in style, which was based on this guy named Hammer who did this song called Can't Touch This. You may have heard it in the store. And he danced around in these really poofy looking things. And so everybody was like, that's cool, let's do that. It was the time of really big clothing. So big t-shirts rolled up, big jackets, big pants, but then like pegged at the bottom so that your socks showed. Why? Why do you guys like skinny pants? Leg warmers. That goes with the leotards and the aerobics. I went to a school that had uniforms and we wore skirts. So in the winter it got really cold. So we wore our rainbow leggings, leg warmers, with our skirts. Oh my word. I tried to find some so I could wear some today because it just doesn't feel right not to have any. But you can't find very many of them. All right, I just want to take you to an 80s wedding because that so encapsulates this whole entire decade. So So you remember the sweatbands and everything? So even the weddings, they were wearing stuff that's like a sweatband. It just had this poofy big bow out the back. And I'm not kidding. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was like lots of them. Even the bridesmaids. The big colors of that decade were teal and pastel pink. Or all pastels if you wanted to, with hats to go with your really awesome hair. Somebody's looking at these and is like, oh, my wedding, they're so pretty. And the cakes. The cakes were just like phenomenal. Remember, the bigger the better, the more the better, bigger, more, everything. So the cakes got real big, and it was all about, they had like little stairs going from the one to the other, and that was a total trend. You could even put little people for all your little bridesmaids on the little stairs going from one gate to the other. Okay, all right. Sugar. Feels like the decade, to me as a kid, it felt like the decade of sugar. You didn't just have pixie sticks. They made big pixie sticks. That's when those things showed up. And you had those sugar thingies with the little, it's got the little thing and you eat just the colored sugar like right out of it. Yes, those. And there was a gas station across the street from the school, and I was allowed to go by myself because why not, you know? And I go across and I get one of those and I just load up on the sugar. We got the Pop-Tarts, we got the sugary cereal, which goes with the Saturday morning cartoons, geared toward children, marketed toward children, because they're the ones who are eating it on Saturdays. Pop-Tarts, just Little Debbie's. Now, I'm just going to say this. Remember, this is my memories from my school. Not everybody had this experience. When I mentioned to my husband, like, you know, you always had a Little Debbie in your lunch. He was like, I never had a Little Debbie in my lunch. So I said, well, what did you have in your lunch? Like, vegetables. Poor boy. He just missed out. So we're going to give him an oat milk pie. They weren't invented in the 80s, but I feel like they came to their happy place in the 80s because a lot of us kids, our moms went to work. And that changed the culture and changed the society for the children. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The cereal got real sugary and very targeted toward children, not targeted toward parents. Again, Saturday morning cartoons. Smurf Berry Crunch. Smurf Berry Crunch is fun to eat. Da, 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 da. I still remember this. They killed the Nutcracker for me. Like, I can't listen to it without being like, Smurf Berry Crunch, you know. Dunkin' Donuts cereal. E.T. cereal. If you don't know who this is, well, ask somebody. Nerds cereal to go with your Nerds candy, which you were eating at lunchtime. So we needed aerobics. We needed to run all this off. Kool-Aid came to be a big thing. Just stuff that was packaged. It was the decade for packaged things, microwave things. They call us the microwave generation because you wanted stuff that you could do quickly. You didn't want to have to heat it up on the stove. You didn't want to have to do it in the oven. Here's a meal all put together that looks super delicious. Oh my goodness, 44 cents. You stick in the oven and you can heat it up yourself. There's a reason for this. Look at these advertisements. You are watching a boy make pudding. Here's the little kid with the oatmeal. Why is this important? Why are they putting advertisements for kids making their own food? Cultural shift. The 80s were the decade when the moms rose up and decided, I'm going to have a career, and I'm going to be awesome, and I'm going to make as much money as my husband, and et cetera, et cetera. The corporate dream, the corporate ladder. The women of America had a lot to prove at that point. You remember in the 60s when that Feminine Manifesto came out and told them all they were really, really oppressed? Well, they started believing it. So in the 70s, it was all marching for women's rights, and in the 80s, it was like, I'm going to go get a job. So they dressed up in these power suits, which had huge shoulder pads, and part of that was because you're trying to look bigger, you're trying to look more intimidating, you're trying to look like a little more manly so that you didn't look so feminine and sweet, because you had to prove that you could do this job. They wore heels, they wore hose, they wore tons of makeup that was really bright colors, like big red eye blush and, you know, colored eyeshadow and like it was and big hair. I think we were, you know, like when they talk about if you meet a bear in the woods and how are you supposed to intimidate a bear because you're such a little thing and you're supposed to make yourself as big as possible. It almost feels like that. Like they were trying to make themselves bigger. So they were like, haha, I'm a woman, hear me roar, give me a job, that sort of thing. Yeah, but because of this, it changed our culture significantly. The divorce rate went. It wasn't just the women working, there were other factors. Divorce was becoming less of a taboo thing. In the 50s, you just didn't get divorced, or you were going to be scandalized forever. In the 60s, it was more about just love whoever, it doesn't really matter, blah, 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 blah. But the traditional world kind of changed, and the law changed as well. So no-fault divorce became a thing, which means you didn't have to go to court and prove that you should get a divorce, like somebody did the wrong thing. So now you were like, we just aren't compatible. Well, nobody is unless they try to be, but whatever. So if you notice, here's the divorce things from 1860, when there was like basically none, to 1880, 1900, 1920s. Remember the Roaring 20s? Get a little more free and easy, so it went up. Then the Depression happened, well, And then the 40s, now this is really, really interesting. At the end of World War II, it went for a little teeny weeny bit, and then it came back down. Think a second, critical thinking skills. Why do you think maybe that was? Someone who's not related to me. Daniel.
Probably because they came with not so bright ideas from America.
So they were influenced by the places they went. That's interesting. Ryan, what do you think? Okay. Ryan.
A lot of people got married before they went to war, and maybe they came back to find their spouses had changed dramatically.
Okay. Or even like they met over the weekend, decided to get married, and then he left, and they'd known each other like 2 days. Like, this is a great idea. We're awesome. We're meant for each other. Hey, it's like a movie. And then they came home and were like, you're weird. I don't like you. So it didn't always work out like the movies, and the movies usually end before that part happens. With the pretty music. Yay, happily ever after. Ooh, y'all are having problems. We're just going to leave now. So, and then it went back down to normal. And the 50s and 60s were, the 50s were more conservative, blah, 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 blah. Then you have this law where you can get a divorce whether you have a good reason to or not. And the women start going to work and trying to prove themselves that they're just as good as the guys. And there's more single families. That's not such a bad thing in society. And some other factors. And all of a sudden, people are like, I don't want to have to do this. And just, the divorce rates went way up. And then they settled back down. So there's actually less divorce now than there was in the 80s. So when you're like, it's never been as bad as it is right now. Well, the problem is right now there's more just like not getting married at all. So it does balance out. But this was a significant change in our culture. Significant. And it affected the families, of course, the husbands and wives, but it really affected the kids. So these kids of the 80s, my generation, were known as the latchkey kids. Now, I wasn't the latchkey kids. I was very blessed. My mom taught at the Christian school I went to. So when we were out of school and she was out of school, we were together. That was very nice. But a lot of kids whose moms went to work and whose dads went to work, who's going to watch them when they come home from school? Nobody. So they would get their house key and they'd put it around their neck in a little necklace kind of thing. And they would be wearing it, and it was their job. When school got out, they just went home by themselves, and they just hung out by themselves until somebody came home. Now we don't have the internet, we don't have cable TV, we don't have gadgets, we don't have cell phones, so nobody knows where this kid actually is. The 80s was a much freer, like, kids will take care of themselves, they're resilient, don't worry about them, Jimmy just jumped off and lost a tooth, put it in your pocket, take it home, it'll be all right, just kind of like, whatever. And, there were some ramifications to that. I think one of the reasons we have the helicopter parenting that we do today, that was my generation growing up, and I think some of them were like, I'm not going to be like my parents. I'm going to pay attention to my kid. My kid's going to know I care about them and what they're doing. I'm going to know where my kid is every blooming second of the day because I'm so worried about him because I remember the stuff that I did. So there's reasons sometimes for the things that happen. There was only one kid in my class who was a latchkey kid. I remember it. It was 4th grade. His name was Jim Bellner. He was like genius level smart. He could do Legos back before there were all those special pieces that you guys have. We just had like bricks, and he could make a helicopter with a rotating thing, and he had glasses, and he wore blue suits to class, and his parents both worked, so he went home and he was by himself. And I remember feeling really sorry for him. I bet he's like Bill Gates today. Okay, let's learn some more stuff besides just our clothing, as cool as it was. Movies and TV. Indiana Jones from the 80s. Maybe you didn't think that was very old, but if you look at her hair, you'll figure it out. This guy, anybody heard about him? The first Top Gun movie came out in my generation. It's very weird that you guys are getting another one. More Star Wars movies. Yay. This guy. Does anybody know who this is? All right, Steve Urkel. He was part of a show. We all liked Steve Urkel. He was fun to make fun of. And then we all kind of just fell in love with him because he was just such an adorable geek. And back at the time, calling someone a geek or a nerd was not a cool thing. In the 80s, TVs were these big clunky things, and you had 3 channels. So if you wanted to change channel, you got up and you changed the channel, and sometimes it was all fuzzy like a bunch of snow. It's like, oh man, so you had to work on the antenna. Turn it, oh, almost, no, almost, oh, I lost it, almost. Hey, Billy, like so. Billy, go up on the roof and turn the antenna. And so poor Billy would have to climb up on the roof of the house and hold the antenna while the dad would open the window. Not yet, try the left. And he'd turn it to the left. Wait, almost right there. Right there, stay right there, don't move. And poor Billy would have to stand there until the game was over. Hopefully it didn't rain. Antenna, you know. So most of us knew what we were all watching on TV. It wasn't like now when you have 1,000 shows and you're doing your own thing, and there are groups of people who watch groups of things. So if you were watching TV, you were watching the same stuff and you were all talking about it, that sort of thing. So Urkel was like, we all knew who Urkel was. He was part of this show about this black family, and he was the dork, the little geeky kid who was in love with the cool girl, and I think he was just there for laughs at the beginning. But he was just so charming that we all just thought he was awesome after a while. And he grew up over the years, and I don't remember what year it was, but finally he got to be a teenager, and he transformed, and he realized he wasn't that, and he actually did get the girl in the end. So that was sweet. But one thing that you notice, if you look at the 80s, it was like the decade for black TV. So remember before we were having all these problems with all these prejudice and stuff, and like today they're saying that it's been pervasive throughout the whole thing. I don't agree based on my own childhood. So there were all these shows like The Cosby Show. It was an entirely black cast about a black family. They were middle class. They were not poor, no victimizing. They didn't talk about prejudice that I can ever remember. They were just who they were, having their adventures or misadventures, learning stuff. He was a doctor. She was a lawyer. They had money. So this was like the Great American Family kind of thing, and we all watched it, and I don't remember anybody talking about the fact that they were all black. It wasn't a thing. And then there were all these spin-off shows. This was when they went to college, and so this was another fully 100% black cast, and we watched that too. This was Urkel and the Family Matters, same thing. This was another show I didn't watch, but again, fully 100% black, and it wasn't an issue. So when somebody tells you this is the way it's been forever and ever, again, remember, there's usually either an agenda or just a perspective. Maybe somebody told them that, maybe they studied 2 things, and now they're convinced about, the whole history of America. Kind of like the Democrat-Republican thing. Wait till we get into that. You're going to be shocked. So anyway, there it is. Here's some more. Okay. Does anybody know what this is?
Okay.
Check. Okay. This is a credit card machine before you had those things you stick your little credit cards in. So back in the day, most people used checks or they used cash. And credit cards weren't that normalized. So if a store was going to use a credit card, they had this funky little machine, and this is like little carbon copies with information on it. And they would stick the little carbon copy in there. You would hand them your credit card. They would put it in this special slot. And then they would go, and it carbon copied all your credit card information onto this paper. And nobody seemed worried about that, but you just handed it over. But, that's the way it worked. I was overseas when those other machines got invented where you put your card in. So when I came back in 2000 and I went to Walmart and it was time to pay, I was like, what do I do? And I think they were kind of like, where have you been the past few years, under a rock? And it's like, I was in a third world country. We don't do this. I felt so stupid because it was like, well, duh, which was a phrase from the 80s, a word. Recognize this guy? He was already in the news in the 80s. He was a billionaire. He was buying these buildings. There was a big scandal. Scandal has not been a stranger to this boy. And he was quite sure of himself from the beginning. And this was his wife. Now you notice, she's like the epitome of all the 80s things that we just looked at, right? Got the big hair. She's got the blue eyeshadow. She's even got like blue eyeliner. She's got the big, bright everything. Guess he didn't think she was good president wife material. Okay, let's just have an 80s moment. Anybody want to go up on the roof and move the antenna? Inventing some new stuff. The boombox. Now the boombox is important because there's no such thing as a CD. I mean, it was invented in the 70s, but we weren't using them. We had never heard of them. We were using these babies. Cassette tapes. This was our music. and the music came on the radio, and if you wanted to make your own cassette tape, you had to listen and hope if the song that you liked came on, and you had to hope that you were sitting right there when it came on, and you had to hope that you pushed the button right when the song started so you could get the beginning of the song. So a lot of people had tapes that had like half songs. Or the guy talking while the song starts, you know, and now we're going to hear from so-and-so and such and such. We didn't have anything else, so, you know, it was the way it was. And what would happen, like I told you, sometimes it would get locked up. And then all of a sudden you start hearing, the chipmunks started singing. And it was like, oh, no, no, no. So you open it up. Now you spent 5 hours making this tape of all your favorite songs. And now it looks like this.
Yay.
What am I going to do?
It's a pencil.
Yeah, so you get a pencil because the little pencil grooves match this just right. And you start going, oh, no, I hope it's okay. I hope it's okay. Or you did it with your finger if you had long fingernails. This took a really long time. Sorry about the asthma. And then, as mentioned before, sometimes it would work out and it would play again, and sometimes you would have a new sound. Okay, thanks, yeah. Or everybody started singing very high, kind of like in India. That was a thing too, and maybe if you liked that, that was okay. But the boombox was portable music. We didn't have MP3s. We don't have songs on our phone. We didn't have phones. We didn't have any of this stuff. So this was a big, huge trend, especially in the city. You had a boombox, so you could carry it on your shoulder. Now, I didn't have a boombox. Obviously, this is not my culture. And sometimes you had the spray paint, so you could do graffiti. Graffiti became a big thing in the cities at this decade because you were spending a lot of time outside with your boombox because now you got music. And they'd get together, they'd listen to their music, they would break dance. This was the decade of breakdancing. Unbelievable athleticism, very cool, but it was associated with a genre of the culture that was very inner city, with the graffiti and everything that went with it. We invented that in the 80s. Isn't that so cool? So all your emojis had their birth in my decade. The PG-13 rating happened in the 80s. Now this is important, because if you find a movie from 1980s, 1979, you're like, oh, it's rated PG, it'll be fine. No. Girl. Ask somebody who's watched it before. Because there was no such thing. So there was G, which meant everybody can watch it. There was PG, parental guidance, which would have been a good idea, but you remember the 80s when the parents weren't like around very much. And then there was R. And remember, we only have 3 stations. And TV that came on, movies that came on TV had to be edited. So there's a lot of movies that sometimes your parents are like, oh, that was such a fun movie. And if you start watching it, you're just like, I can't believe you watched this. Oh, my word. And we are feeling the same way because the one we watched was cleaned up. So if you wanted to watch the whole thing with all the bad stuff in it, you had to buy HBO, which was the beginning of cable. And that's when they showed the movies just like they showed them in the movie theater. So, again, my generation, if you have we aren't allowed to go to the movies, that's one of the reasons, because the movies played it without it getting cleaned up. So the movies were dirtier, trashier, whatever you want to call it, than the stuff that was on TV. Very interesting. So they made this on purpose, so they kind of split it out so that all the little kids maybe weren't watching, you know. No need to say anything. Thank you. Cabbage Patch Kids. These were weird, y'all. I mean, it was a huge, big trend. And even when I was a little kid, I was just like, it's giving me the creeps. Because you had to go to this special Cabbage Patch hospital where they were born from cabbages. And you had to sign out an adoption form and promise that you were going to take care of this thing. And like all this, it was weird. But it was cool, apparently, to a lot of people. Now the Care Bears, I did think were really cool. I had a Care Bear. They were soft. And they had all these different kinds. Game Boy, the beginning of traveling video games where you were like this. That was the first time there was something digital in your hand and your parent was saying, stop spending all your time staring at that thing. These were this cool, I just wanted to show you because it was so innovative. Pre-computer and all these programs, there were these little plates that had designs on them that stuck out. And you would decide your outfit based on all this. And you would put it together, plate, plate, plate. And then you'd put your paper over it and roll over it, kind of like that card machine. But you do it with your pencils or whatever. And it would make this design. And so you were your own fashion designer making your own super awesome fashion things. This was our video games. If you were rich enough, you might have an Atari. And Atari, this is one of the big games. Now what this did, there was a little dot here that went doink, doink, kind of like a screensaver now, some of them. And it would bounce off these things, but depending on where it hit, it would go different places. And so you had to slide this thing back and forth to try and catch it. And it looks like totally mind-numbingly stupid, but it's actually, it takes some skill and some whatever. You might get yourself hooked on it, might not, till it broke, and then you blew on it. That was the other one. Slip and slide was the total thing. And when I saw this, I was like, I have to put this on here to talk to you about because of the whammo. So advertising gives you this glorified view of things. And so you have this idea as kids. We were like, oh, this is the newest, coolest thing. You lay out this piece of plastic. We could have thought of those ourselves. And you like pour water on it. And then you go running. And you're supposed to go wee like this. But what usually happened, I grew up in Florida. What usually happened, dry dirt, scratchy grass sticking up, hills, you know. What usually ends up happening. You're all full of anticipation. This is so exciting. I can't wait for this. And you run and you jump and you go wham! Oh! So it was true advertising. Macintosh, the computer for the bemused, confused, and intimidated. Now you'll notice this if you're into like National Geographic magazines, you can see the history of advertising through those magazines. And advertising at this point was about information. So you actually had words, like words to tell you stuff. It was really amazing. Now again, no internet, so if you want information, it has to come somewhere. So this was supposed to tell you everything you needed to know. But what this is telling you is it's so cool and cutting edge. I mean, you got your floppy disk in your pocket. Wow, that's so innovative. And look at all the things you can do. You could draw a smiley face. This is so new and modern. Wow. And at the end, it says soon there'll be just two kinds of people. Those who use computers and those who use apples. Is he right? No, not really. But it sounds really cool. These guys, you may recognize them, may not. Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. So in the 80s, they were young guys creating stuff. Remember the Apple computer from last week? And when the IBM computer was first made, they thought it would sell 125,000 over the entire life of the product, and it would be over. How many do you think they've sold by this point? Millions, billions. So this guy was real surprised. Steve Jobs and Apple created an interface. So the computer that we all use as far as the commands and instructions and being able to open a program, you can thank him for that, because before that, everything you did, it was all coding. Now, if any of you like coding, you know that it's excessively complicated. I mean, just to get your computer to say hello, as in written on there, takes an unbelievable amount of coding. When I was in high school, we had a class on computers, and what we learned was coding. Little thingies that went around here, and it told you this, and they were cool. I couldn't tell you anything that I learned, except I learned how to play Tetris, because they had that on the computer at school, and we didn't have a computer, so yay for that. Wrong computer. All right, there were also the yuppies. These were the up-and-coming young people, young urban professionals, if you didn't know what that meant. They were rich, they were getting jobs, they were the ones with the minds. So this was, again, a cultural shift. Your service jobs, manual labor, all of that kind of went from, this is important, needed, and helpful, like your farmers and stuff. All of a sudden they were like, oh, they do manual labor. We do computers. We are the yuppies. We dress up to go to work, and we don't get dirty fingers, and we work at a desk. Working at a desk, this was a whole, like, weird concept. And it changed the definition of success. So the young people, you needed to go to college so that you could get a job, so that you could be famous, you know, you could be rich, and you could be successful in the world that was this kind of success. Oh man, I got an hour's worth of things to tell y'all because this is such a great decade. This was the beginning of the 24-hour news station for the very first time, because before it was just on at 6 and 11. That thing, stealth bomber. Oh man, we didn't even get into politics, y'all. We got 10 minutes. I'm going to talk fast. Listen fast. The Iran hostage crisis went for 44 days. The president was like, so it didn't work out so well for him. Worked out really well for the next guy who wanted to be the president, which was Not Carter. He was the one that was done. This guy. To me, Reagan embodies the 80s. And he embodies all the wonderful values and qualities of the 80s, the best parts of it. It was traditional values. It was going back to, let's support our military instead of like the Vietnam War where it was just like, so we put money into the military. He started putting some power and pride back into our military, pride back into being an American, where after the 70s that had really died. He was very anti-communism. He's the one who made that speech, tear down this wall with the Berlin Wall. You should watch that. It's very cool. He was a man, but he was also this really, he reminded me of my grandpa. He was just this friendly, charming guy who also backed up what he said. And he was funny. If you want, get on YouTube and be like, funny jokes from Ronald Reagan. He was an actor when he was young. And I think that really taught him things about how to work a crowd, how to know where the cameras are, how to know the good timing and tone and space. You listen to him speak, the man knew how to speak. And he would also keep things, it wasn't just that it all came naturally to him and he just knew all these jokes. If he heard something good, he'd keep little 3x5 cards. And he was always learning quotes and jokes and stories and things. And he would tell these wonderful stories. He would disarm his opponents even and make them laugh. So instead of screaming and yelling like the latest debates that we've heard, he was in a debate one time with this other guy. And he was, obviously he's not a young guy. He was the oldest president we'd had at that point. And so people were really concerned about that. So he was going against this other younger guy who was probably like 65, so not that young. And so they asked him this controversial question in the debate, trying to raise, make a problem. And they were like, so what about you being so old? Do you think this is going to be a problem? And he stands there. He's like, what's he going to say? Is he going to get mad? Is he going to insult him? What's he going to say? And he says, I am not going to make age a part of my campaign. I am not going to take advantage of my opponent's youth and inexperience so I can win this election. And it was, nobody expected that. Look, nobody expected him to be funny. So the guy over there is bust out laughing. The guy over here bust out laughing. The whole place. And it was like, all of a sudden, the whole country was that man's friend. I think he was probably the most well-liked president since maybe Lincoln, maybe Washington. Even the media actually liked him. This was his campaign slogan. Familiar? So when somebody else borrowed that, he was not just giving a slogan he thought the American people would like. My generation has a feeling associated with that slogan. So what he was saying was, I'm like that guy. So if you liked him, you're going to like me. Check this out. The man won America. Except for Georgia. What's that all about? There were only 3 states that didn't vote for him. He was very anti-big government. So with some of the things he said, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. Oh, nobody be saying that today. Maybe they should. The most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So he was against like big social change and basically a lot of the stuff that's being pushed right now. This is him when he was younger and he was an actor. He got shot. There was an assassination attempt. This guy, it wasn't because of politics, it was because he fell in love with this actress and he thought if he did something really big like this, he'd catch her attention. There's some weird people out there. But the funny thing was, the man, it was only 1 inch from his heart, this bullet. So it was a big deal. But instead of being all like, oh no, panic, what does he tell the guys that are going to do his surgery? Please tell me you're Republicans. He was just funny. He told his wife, I should have ducked. His wife was really, she made this big program about say no to drugs. It was in all the schools and all that. Just say no, that sort of thing. If we ever forget that we are one nation under God, then we will be a nation gone under. I just liked the man. Second time he ran, it was even better. Look, he got Georgia that time. Everybody except Minnesota, I don't know what their deal was, but everybody wanted this man to be the president. Well, okay, not everybody, but enough. And his running mate was George Bush Sr. I wish we had time to talk about him. You should study this man. He was a World War II hero. I believe his plane got shot down. This man was awesome. He was a really great vice president. He was a lot like Mike Pence. He was very calm. He didn't want the spotlight, but he was a good secondary person. That's him. Okay, gotta move on. Okay, Mount St. Helens erupted. DNA Genome Project. So like starting to convict people based on DNA. That began in the 80s. The Challenger. I watched this live as an 11-year-old. Kids all over the country were watching this because there was a teacher going to space. It was the first time a civilian was going to space. Huge, big deal. major marketing all over the country. So the family was there in person. All these people were there in person watching it. Kids all over the country are watching it live. So excited about this. And it went up in the air. Yay! And then it went psh, psh, and blew up. And that's what it looked like. And I remember. It's weird. When you interview somebody, pick a thing or two about that decade. Like, how did it feel when JFK was assassinated? What was it like during the Cuban Missile Crisis? What was it like did you have anything to do with the Civil Rights Movement? Did you ever go to a disco? What was it like when Elvis was singing? You know, just, there are these certain things that kind of the whole collective nation remembers. Like, where were you when this happened, September 11th? Everybody remembers exactly where they were when they heard about that. Everybody in the 60s could tell you where they were when they heard about JFK. It was just, there are certain things that they're just stuck, because it's like time just sort of stops. And you can ask somebody from the 80s, you can ask them about this. The Berlin Wall. Oh, I wish we had time to talk about that. 1989. Another thing, I'm sorry, my throat's terrible today. Another thing that we got to watch live that we knew, this is history. And we're right here. We're watching on the news. I'm actually going to send y'all a link so you can see some of the footage from that time, from the news, from that night. Over 20 years, Germany had been separated. Big, long story, but the wall went up overnight by the communists, literally. So people who had gone to visit family on the other side were stuck. And for the next 20 some odd years, they didn't get to see their family again. People tried to escape. They made the walls bigger. They were shooting people. They were killing people. And it was the difference between communism trying to keep people in and the free world willing to accept them out. And they wouldn't let them. And so somebody has mentioned before, you know, America's not the best place in the world, but we've never had to put up a wall to keep people in. This was an awesome moment. It was so cool. It was like the whole entire world was rejoicing together for just a little bit. Okay, the bad, the good and the weird. Okay. There was a lot of bad stuff this decade. MTV was invented. I personally think that's very bad. It's basically music television, which was the beginning of music videos, which got really trashy. 80s music was trashy. So I was never allowed to watch MTV. None of my kids are ever going to be allowed to watch MTV. We'll just leave that there. AIDS. It started in Africa. Huge epidemic started going here. A lot of it spread mostly among the immoral groups, but some went through blood transfusions because they weren't thinking about that. So it was this big, huge scare about blood and a big, huge scare about death, and kind of like the COVID scare, this was ours. The good. That doesn't seem like good. Smoking was banned on public transport. So you may not know this, smoking was a huge, big thing. If you ever watch movies from the 50s, it was like everybody was smoking. It was very dramatic and elegant. Not sure why. I think because the smoke and the black and white looked kind of, ooh. So here are these women who are supposed to look all feminine and beautiful, picking stuff off their tongue. It's like, ooh, gag me with a bucket, you know? So you could smoke on the plane, you could smoke in the restaurants, you could smoke everywhere. There was smoking everywhere. And they stopped that. That was nice. First GPS technology-ish sort of thing. The first satellites that were going to tell you recalculating someday. The Vietnam War Memorial. I have the National Geographic that tells the whole story of this. It's a beautiful story. If you want to borrow it, you can. Just bring it back to me. This was a really good thing. Pac-Man? What else? We got to hit the weird before I let you go. Well, there's just this guy. Thank you. And this. This was a picture phenomenon. You would go to the fancy picture place and they'd take your picture and you'd have your real picture and then you'd have this so fuzzy picture looking off into the distance. Pre-Photoshop, whatever. The smoking section. Still to this day, sometimes I walk into a restaurant and I want to tell them no smoking. It's just natural because when we were kids, there was a smoking section and a non-smoking section in every restaurant and they would ask you, smoking or non, smoking or non. And you say non. But the really stupid weird thing was, it's not like they were that separate, so it might be like the smoking section is here and the non-smoking section is here. So like, what's the point? But that's okay, at least they were pretending. Whoa. Did I mention the colored hair? This was the punk rocker generation. So there were those of us who looked like this, but then there were the ones in the street who didn't want to look as normal as we looked, and they wanted to go hardcore. This was the rebellion aspect spiked hair, so you get a mohawk. So you cut all this and you leave this right here, and then you spike it as high as you possibly can and gel it till it's literally stiff. And if you want to make edges that are colored, that's good. Wear a dog collar that has spikes on it and chains. If you ever saw one of these, you just wanted to go the other way because they were on purpose being very anti-society. So like I said. So it's a little weird when I see all these nice kids walking around with red hair and blue hair and green hair. It's just kind of like, ooh, you know. We have 1 minute left. Does anybody have anything to say? Really quick. I know you want to get to game time. Bye. If you brought, I mean it, bye.